You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Welcome back everyone to episode 28 of Arsenal Pass. I'm Hayden, joined by now two-time calling top eighter, Brendan Patrick. Brendan, it's nice to have you on today. How you doing? You still buzzing over that top eight?
Buzzing isn't the word I would use, but it's nice to get a PTI, nice to get a gold foil, and nice to get another chance to win it again next weekend.
It's true. Yep, Cincinnati came out this weekend, so not one to rest as Brendan. He's going to run it back. Well, hopefully, but today is all about you, Mr. Patrick, and as we talk, the calling Dallas, in which Brendan, spoiler alert, ran his way through the gauntlet to make the top 8 draft table. So during the week, I actually put a call out to Twitter to some of our listeners and followers on Twitter and asked for questions during this episode where we talk all about Dallas. Go through drafts, go through the sealed portion, go through some big lessons and takeaways, and then we're going to end with some fantastic questions that have been sent through. So usually, Brendan, this is where we would talk about our weeks in flesh and blood, but that's the focus of the whole pod. So why don't we just get straight into the news?
Yep, so just want to say there's 2 gameplays videos going up this week, Briar versus Katsu, and then Chain versus Rhinar, which should be up either very soon after you hear this or right when you do. Check them out, Arsenal Pass YouTube channel, and then obviously more gameplay coming in the future.
Mm-hmm. As I said, calling Cincinnati this week, you can tune into the coverage if you'd like to. It's on CFB's Channel 5's Twitch, as it has been for Vegas and for Dallas. You can also go, if you didn't get a chance to check out the coverage from Dallas, whether it be Swiss coverage, Day 2 coverage, Top 8 coverage, all the games for the feature games are up on Fab TCG's YouTube page now as well. So you can actually go back and watch those, which is quite nice. And they're all edited together nicely, so there's no dead air or anything like that, so you can go and check those out. And just want to say as well, congratulations to the whole Top 8, including yourself, Brendan, and to Nam, who eventually took it out.
Yep, it was a great event, and obviously congratulations to the winner. It's a huge achievement to win a calling, especially as they're getting so big compared to what we were used to a few years ago. Do want to shout out time in the round. So last week's time in the round was Carol, and this week we have another Legend Story Studios employee come on in the form of Sasha Markovic. So the first man to ever be Living Legend himself, 2-time calling champion, and just all around greatest of all time. It's a great conversation. Check it out. Do want to also note that Time of the Round is now making its way to all podcast platforms near you. It will be on a 3-day delay, but it will no longer be only a YouTube exclusive.
Yeah, all the backlogs up as well. So if if there's episodes that maybe you only checked out some on YouTube, or you didn't get a chance to check it out because it was only on YouTube, now you can go and find that on Spotify. It's on the same stream as the main platform, as the main pod, what you're listening to right now. So you can go and see those, and they're all up there now. With the latest with Carol just went up, and then Sasha will go up, 3 days after it drops on Saturday.
Mm-hmm. I want to do a shout out our over 250 patrons so far. So absolutely exploding on that end. So thank you so much for all the support. If you aren't familiar, we do have tons of extra content on our Patreon. Most notably, if we have a deck tech on Arsenal Pass, the YouTube channel, we do throw up a ton of more content regarding that deck on the Patreon, such as, all the different sideboard guides, deck theory, if I recall correctly, the Levio one was like 9 pages long, as well as ratios, spreadsheets, everything you need to pick it up and start being competitive. Along with that, we also have exclusive podcasts for the Patreon and a live session every month. And finally, I do want to say that next week on YouTube, we will have a Viserai deck going up. It's a really cool deck. I know we were actually planning on doing it a little bit earlier, but I think we might need to tune it a little bit more and make it a little bit stronger. Just want to make sure you guys have the best deck possible to pick up and start playing and start being competitive. And finally here, I do want to shout out that we are going to be starting a new segment. It's going to be called Arsenal Pass, State of the Meta. Hayden will be joining me for the first one, but I will be your host. It'll be a weekly podcast, pretty freeform, 30 minutes to an hour. We're just going to break down everything that's going on in the Flesh and Blood meta week by week, mostly focusing on Classic Constructed, but obviously that'll switch if we come into a Blitz season or anything like that. So keep an eye out for that, and I'm excited.
Yeah, exactly. Sounds good. All right. Well, this week's kind of cookout is basically, we're going to save that for the end with our Twitter questions. So what we're going to do first is we're just going to get into the main topic of the pod. which is the calling, and of course your top 8, Brendan. So we're gonna get what we're gonna do. It's actually funny. We're re-recording this in full, and you know what? The original episode was actually our best episode, but you can't hear that, so you just have to take my word for it. That was our best episode. So we're gonna, go through a lot of things. We've already talked about a lot of this. So, Brendan, second time through, I'm sure you can smash it out in terms of, some of the things that we make sure we want to cover. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk through the event itself. So your experience at the Calling Dallas Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and we're going to talk through the Swiss portion. The decks that you had in Swiss and draft, how they ended up, and then of course the top 8.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and start with Friday then. So we did all get in pretty early on Friday. And our plan was to meet up with some of our friends, and we were doing private 8-man drafts. So just kind of chaining drafts, into, one into the other and repeating and so on. So that was really helpful. Obviously, draft is just something you really kind of have to do in person. It's just hard to emulate online. So it was, it was a good thing to get in. We ended up doing 3 of them. What we would do is we play like 1 to 2 rounds and just, scoop them up, go to the next one, just make sure we kept kind of repeating the process of actually drafting the cards and seeing what the decks kind of came out as. So in those 3, I did draft Briar the first time, Ulton the second time, and Lexi the third time. On the third time, I did force Lexi a bit. So while my deck was bad, I did win my match, but I just knew that I needed to get some reps in on drafting Lexi, because actually prior to going to the calling, which is actually kind of ironic in the scope of what I ended up drafting in the top 64, top 34, top 32, and top 8 cut. I'd actually only drafted Briar. It just seemed that those are the cards that had come to me. I wasn't particularly keen on it, but if my history in Flesh and Blood limited events had told me anything, it's that I tend to get to the the highest pressure scenarios and then draft the thing that I have never played before, which is exactly what I did the last calling. Welcome to Wraith. I was in the top 8. Ninja at that time was thought to be, borderline unplayable and limited, especially in Sealed, which is hilarious looking back on it, because it's absolutely not true. And in the top 8, I go ahead and draft Ninja, a class I've never played in limited ever. So I just knew I needed to get some reps on all of the heroes and just be comfortable to draft my seat and draft smart.
What's funny is in my calling top 8 here in Sydney, there was no Katsu drafters. Everyone passed up Katsu.
Yeah, I know.
It was that strong a belief.
It was really, really slept on. It's funny because if I open up a seal pool, Welcome to Wraith, it's like Katsu is like the easiest one, I think, to actually play. Like, you need the least things going for you. So it's funny how that works out. So let's talk about the rest of Friday. We do have an early dinner. We go to this steakhouse called Nick and Sam's. I've been there before. Obviously, I'm a local. I actually think it's like the best place in Dallas. 7 of us go. We just have like an incredible dinner, and then I take all the guys over to this place called Akai. It's a speakeasy in the back of a sushi restaurant called Musume in Dallas. It's really cool. You like walk back in the back of the kitchen, walking behind the restaurant. It's got this like old school like samurai vibe, and it's like they got these like highball whiskeys. So the guys were loving it up. We had a great night. And I remember Dante saying specifically, he's like, okay, if my trip ended right now, this weekend would still be worth it. So I think overall it was a successful night that I was able to curate for them.
It's funny hearing that. And then, so I wanted to ask as well, just take back a step about the drafts on Friday. Obviously last minute, getting in already, you as well as a lot of players in that drafted a fair bit now, but getting some last minute sort of drafting to, make sure some of these ideas and some of these archetypes and things like that play out the way that you think they will. What were sort of some of the big takeaways from either yourself or the other drafters in that group on the Friday? Like, did you break those drafts down? Did you talk about them? Were there certain things that people were trying? Obviously, you forced Lexi in the last draft, but was there sort of things that you took into the weekend with more confidence or?
Yeah, I definitely did get a lot of confidence, but it just reinforced my idea that in this format, you need to draft your seat and be willing to play any archetype and play it well. I think that's more important than like literally anything, because we'll talk about the sealed portion and how Briar plays into that, but that is just so not the case in draft. And we would see a lot of players make it to top 64, top 32, and ultimately kind of stumble and fall because they weren't able to play outside of their comfort zone, whether that was 1 hero or 2 heroes. So it definitely just reinforced that idea that it's all about drafting your seat. It's drafting conservatively and just having, the best average to good deck you can. If you have a great deck, that's fantastic. But what you don't want to have is a bad deck.
Yeah. And you're talking about draft specifically then, right?
Draft specifically. Yeah.
It's pretty funny because I think one of the things that people have commented on and we've said before is you've seen draft decks often that are worse than people's sealed decks, right?
So consistently in this format. I mean, I think that most draft decks that I've played against, and even the ones that I've drafted, I think it was more before this calling. I ended up getting some really good decks during this calling. Were definitely worse than a lot of the sealed pools that I'd had.
Yeah, and if people are looking for a reason why that is, it comes down to like the 3 heroes, I think. So overall, you're going to get more cards that you could play in your sealed pool, and what's going to happen in draft is you're probably going to people could sit between elements, and while that's not the end of the world, there's definitely dual element decks you can play. Sometimes those decks just end up being much, much worse if you're spread across or you're sat next to someone who ends up cutting you from an element that you committed to early or things like this. So, I'm sure once we get to the draft, you're going to talk more about drafting your seed.
More about
how you did that.
Yeah, it's more about elements. In that sense, like you can't really high roll like the best element cards in the game in a draft. Like it's really like it can happen, but it's super unlikely you're going to get like 4 Weavers or like 3 red Earthware Surges. Like it can happen, but people will pick those up, especially for like early in the packs. They'll be kind of staying open with those really strong picks. Like, but you can just absolutely get a bonkers sealed pool, and a lot of these element cards, which are safe to pick early, you can just get a ton of them. And in draft, like you're definitely fighting for them, it seems.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Friday comes around and goes. Get a few drafts under the belt, get a steak under the belt, get probably a whiskey or a highball under your belt, and then and then Saturday rolls around. So what's it like? First of all, I want to know what it's like heading into that venue on a Saturday. How did it compare to Vegas? What is it just in general coming into a calling event center, and what's the sort of general atmosphere and how are people?
Sure. So I mean, a lot of people actually commented on this and kind of reinforced this idea, but the overall atmosphere and energy was a lot more laid back. I don't know if that's an excitement or an anxiety kind of reason for that, but overall it felt a lot more comfortable, a lot more laid back. But same thing as you kind of would see with Vegas, like just kind of a sea of people, on the main event side. And a big venue, of course. So yeah, but I think that my initial takeaway is that it felt a lot more relaxed and just kind of like another day in the office, which might just be me getting more comfortable with big events.
Yeah. It's hard to tell which is the general atmosphere of the room, which is just the way you feel on any given day, especially if you've got a group of people around you and how they kind of what their feelings are as well. And because often you can, if you're standing in a group of you're with a group of people, group of friends, the sort of the vibe of that group or the feelings that are sort of emanating from that group can sort of be how you end up feeling, I think. But I'm sure like you say, the second calling now in the space of 3 weeks, soon to be 4 in the side of a month. I think that makes a lot of sense. So obviously you sit down, you grab your seal pool, talk us through it.
Yeah. So I sit down, grab my sealed pool. Unfortunately, I get someone doesn't show up at our table, so I'm in something called a triple, which for me is one of the situations that I hate to be in the most because Hayden will probably soon remark here, as he did the last time we recorded this, that he always has a plethora of time to finish his registration and checking and stuff like that. When you're in a triple, it's a lot harder because you get the allotted time of 2 people opening packs, but for 3. And then maybe somebody doesn't have the dexterity to open the packs very quickly, which happened at our table, or they just haven't seen the cards a lot, so it's hard. It takes them a lot longer to register your pool. So we were really tight on time, which sucked. It was honestly terrible. I barely had enough time to check my thing, to check and verify that mine was correct. Which, if you're listening to this and you're playing ever at a professional event, check it, because I know so many people that got dinged for having incorrect pools registered, and it's super easy. Out of the 4 times, and we're talking 1 sealed, 1 in draft, I had 2 of them that had errors on them, so it's extremely common. So definitely check. But yeah, that was not my favorite way to start it. Obviously, then you get a bunch of time to I had plenty of time to deck build, but yeah, we were definitely strapped for time on the registration process. I do open my deck. It kind of blows, to say the least. I get 5 amulets, 2 pieces of armor, both being crackerjacks, and then the only playable class I have is Runeblade. And I have some great non-attack actions, but I have about 4 red attack actions, so really, really bad on that one. And like a lot of people see some of the non-attack actions I had, and they're like, "Oh yeah, those are like the ones you want, right?" Like I had 4 Bramble Sparks, which is really good. I had 3 Electrifies. Like these are really, really good cards, by the way. These are like blue; they weren't red, mind you. But what this does is, like, if you're really light on attack actions in Briar, your deck has to not draw the 4 non-attack, because if you draw the 4 non-attack and limited, you almost lose the game like every single time. It's ridiculous because it's so tempo based, it's so explosive. like you just can't just pass your turn. It's really bad. So my sealed pool looked abysmal, but it was fine. All that was going through my head was like, okay, I just have to really play myself out of Swiss, and then I get to the draft portion, and that's where I'll go ahead and excel.
Yeah, and I've actually just looking at your draft deck, Brendan. I just put up the picture.
My sealed deck or my draft deck?
Sorry, your sealed deck, as I did last time, and we will post the sealed deck picture as well alongside this in the description. But it's like when I first looked at your sealed pool, I was like, oh no, like this is good. And then I kind of dived in a little bit deeper, and it's like, oh, there's like good elements, definitely. Like on the surface, like you say, it looks really good, but you're missing some red cards, things like that, some strong attack actions. But you've a couple of good cards, and it felt like it was doable, right? Like it wasn't a complete train wreck.
Honestly, when I was first looking at it, I thought it kind of looked like a train wreck. Like everything was coming in for 3 or 2, and like it was just rough. But what I did have was I had quite a bit of arcane damage and like pinging. And I really like this at Briar, like because like obviously there's like the explosive Briar that you're gonna face down like 80% of the time that just kind of rolls you over with the most ridiculous cards. What I like to do is like be able to ping in arcane damage plus like an attack for 4 or something like that, and just tempo the embodiment tokens and then outvalue my opponent on blocks. And obviously if I have a lot of non-attack actions, I can block very efficiently with that. So when I was looking at this, I was like, yeah, this looks like a train wreck. I wasn't too happy with it, but I just knew that my deck had to draw well. Like if it drew well, it was fine. If it drew the 4 non-attack, then I was in a bad spot.
Yeah. So Seal Pool's finished. You've registered. I actually didn't say anything about the time thing. I do think that if for those who haven't done a limited event at something like a calling or an event where you need to register the deck, so any event, I guess we need to register it. So I guess a pro quest, a calling, whatever it might be, and I'm sure people do this in the future. You sit down alongside someone. This isn't your opponent. This is just someone who you've usually alphabetically or whatever you're sitting across from. And one side of the room is going to open their pool. So say me and Brendan are sitting across from each other. The judge will say, okay, left-hand side of the room, put your hand up. Brendan will chuck his hand up. You're going to open your packs first. So you open your 6 packs. The other person, so me in this case, is there to verify what they open, right? Make sure there's no funny business going on. So Brendan will open his packs, and then they'll ask, okay, has everyone opened their packs now? All right. The other side of the room, put your hand up. Now you're going to open up your packs. And then Brendan will watch me open up my packs. And then those are my cards. So if I open my cards, there's no feels bad. It's not like, we're going to swap cards or anything. These cards that I've opened are now my cards. But we swap pools, and Brendan's going to register that for me, and I'm going to register his for him. So in theory, they should be making sure there's enough time that everyone's opening their cards. But obviously I don't know what happened on the day. My experience so far at ProQuest has been the judges have been pretty good about it. You do then have, about 20 minutes, I think, to register the pool. And if you've done it before, honestly, it'll probably take you 10 minutes once you've done it a couple of times. But then once you get your pool back, right? So once you swap back over after that 20 minutes, you can have half an hour to build. At the start of that half an hour, and you don't get extra time for this, which is what you're talking about, right, Brennan, is you want to check those cards. Make sure that the person across from you has registered them correctly, because it's not on them after the deck build. It's on you if the cards don't match the sheet. So you want to make sure those are checked. And the thing to do, the nice thing to do, and the thing that most people do, and you're, I think, generally told to do, is to alphabetize within class and within category the cards, so that when you pass that pull back after registering it, it's going to be really easy for that person to check them off. I think, Brendan, sounds like you probably didn't get that, and I've had events. I think the last calling I had, my person sitting across from me who checked my pool didn't do that for me, and it definitely did take up like a couple of my deck building minutes, which is like a bit frustrating, right?
It's not about alphabetizing for me. It's in Flesh and Blood. I think you need to put you just put all of the electrifies together. You don't sort it by color. Because when you sort it by color, then it's really annoying, right? Like, as you go back to your blues, there's 2 electrifies back there. You go in your reds.
That's what I mean by alphabetize. So you alphabetize. Yeah. So you go through your A's, you get to E, you've got 2 electrify. Okay.
For sure.
You go down.
But I don't care if it's actually alphabetized. Like, I don't alphabetize just because like I'm kind of dyslexic and it would take me forever to like alphabetize it in sets. But I do just keep them together, and like for me, that's the most important part, because then you just can bang right through and then get them done easily enough. But yeah, like Hayden said, you mentioned like 20 minutes and 30 minutes. I don't recall the timer being that long for us. I don't remember what it was exactly.
It feels shorter when you're in the moment.
Yeah, I did feel really stressed for time. I was like, dang it.
Yeah. I think if if people are going to these callings or to ProQuest in the future, like you will get the same amount of time. It's just I think a thing of making sure you use your time wisely. But a time management, I think it's really difficult, especially if it's like the first time or the second time we haven't done it in a while, which is tough
For sure.
All right, so deck's done and dusted, registered. You head off. I'm sure you're having a chat with the guys. How did everyone feel about their seal pools overall?
Yeah, I mean, Dante's pool sucked. Then everybody else's pool was just absolutely busted that we kind of went with. Like Steven, who went undefeated in Swiss, his pool was crazy. Zach's pool was crazy. Tim, who I lost to on stream, his pool was absolutely nuts. I wish that he had showed it to me because then I would have known about the triple sigil, but it's all good.
It's funny that you guys played on each other on stream. That's so like in a 500 and what was it, 20 person event, you both play on stream.
I like playing those kind of. I like playing my friends, and I like playing them on stream too because it's just funny, and it's ultimately it's a calling. It's not like the craziest high stakes ever, so it's all fun. But yeah, let's go through the round. So round one, my opponent is decently soft, but his deck is ridiculous. He has a full suit of armor. He's just absolutely coming at me, and then he gets 2 embodiment tokens really early. I come in for like 4 or something, and he blocks with an Entwine Earth, and he was like full block. I was like, no, blocks for 2. And then he picked up the card, put it back in his hand, put another card down. I was like, no, can't do that. Like, it's a calling. Don't do that. So I didn't call a judge or anything, but yeah, he did put it back down. Obviously, that was not good for him, and I got a lot of tempo back after that. So unfortunately, that's how it had to go. But I think that I was probably winning that game anyway because he played like a couple tomorrows or something, and he was like. He had put like Rejuvenate Red on the bottom of his deck. So I think he was planning on fatiguing me or something, which just wasn't going to happen with a deck like mine, with like all this arcane damage, right? 4 Bramble Sparks. So that one gets done and dusted pretty cleanly. And then we go on to round 2. Round 2, I don't particularly remember, to be honest. I think it was over pretty quickly. It was definitely like I played 7 rounds of Swiss. I played 5 Briars, and I played all the Lexies in like the final rounds. Actually, the 2 final rounds to be specific. But yeah, round 2 goes by, and I'm assuming that it was somewhat uneventful because I can't remember for the life of me when we did this yesterday. And then in round 3, I'm on stream. So I always lose round 3 at like every event I go to that I don't go undefeated in. Road to Nats, like the last calling, you name it. And then I always lose apparently I lose everything on stream as well. So double whammy. And I'm up against Zach's brother Tim. And Tim had already told me his deck is just absolutely crazy. I'm like, oh, geez, here we go. So we're on stream. I am definitely winning the game, and then I draw the 4 non-attack action. So after having tempo and having a clear way to win, I just go, well, you know what, sir? I didn't want to win anyway. Here you go. And just swing for 2. There was pretty much no way I was actually going to win that game, but on the final turn of the game, I actually do a strictly incorrect sequence. I played a Stir the Wildwood for 10 when the correct was Earthstorm Surge, Ball Lightning, and Swing the Sword. I still would have died to the triple sigil, but it was a bummer to make like such a bad play on camera, and that was the thing that I was actually kind of bummed about after that. But it was all good. Like, I didn't mind losing. I just knew I had to submarine my way up, and just not lose any more games.
Yeah, and you can go and check that game out. It's on, as I say, the Fab TCG YouTube page. Good game, a little bit heartbreaking. Seeing there's a good meme going around about you, Brendan, and on camera games, because every time you play on camera at these calling events, it seems to be that you are. Ridiculous stuff happens, triple sigils, triple invert existences.
Yeah, go watch the quarterfinals if you want to see the one that I'm at. That one is far beyond the triple sigil and triple invert. But yeah, so we go into round 4 or 5. It's a bit murky for me on 4 and 5, but 4 or 5, I played a guy named Cameron. I met him in Road to Nationals events before, and I remember one thing that's notable is like I always count my opponent's deck, but if I know my opponent personally, I'll be like, hey. Like after we obviously roll off, I'm like, do you guys want to tell me how many cards? And then I'll just shuffle it so I don't have to count. He was like, 31 or 32. So I decided to count anyway because he has another number. And it turns out it's 37. And that was not because he was trying to shark me. He actually just left in his Oldhim board. So I think that really hurt him in our game because from what I'd heard before, his deck was very, very good, but it did not perform well in our match. And I was able to pick up the win. Round 6 and round 7, I played 2 Lexies. Something very notable in round 6 is I play Lexi, a guy named James Teeple. James Teeple, I played at the top 8 in the Calling Austin 2019. I played him in multiple Road to Nationals. Known the guy for a while. He's playing Lexi. He makes me go, I win the tie roll. I chose to go first. I draw a very bad hand. No arcane damage. Can't get an embodiment. But does have a Ball Lightning in it. And I was like, okay, pass. He's like, pass. Why would you say pass? I was like, well, you have Shiver. It's an instant. And he goes, oh, okay. Like I guess he hadn't thought about it. And then you activate Shiver, pitches a card, loads Dazzling Crescendo. And I was like, okay. I mean, I play a lot of Kano, so I've been hosed by this, every time I've tried to go off on my opponent's turn when they have an action point. So I got Cracker Jack's Ball Lightning and then do a Autumn's Touch for 6. And I still have the Arsenal. So ultimately, my opponent takes 6 off of that. He was really bummed about that, but honestly, if you're playing Flesh and Blood and your opponent can do instant things on your turn, it's not Arsenal pass, it's pass Arsenal. So definitely something you should keep in mind, and you maintain your action point during that time as well.
Yeah, we've tricked everyone. Yeah, I was gonna say we've tricked everyone, but not quite. I mean, it's you pass priority in the action phase, right? And then with your action point, and if your opponent then passes it, so you both pass on an empty combat chain, then you go to Arsenal. Tidy up the turn, Arsenal, and then ultimately pass the turn back, right? But yeah, but it is something to, I know, obviously, usually people get got by that once if they're not clear about how maintaining the action point works during an action phase. They played against Kano, they played against Dash, things like this, then usually after that, they're pretty good. But like you say, I mean, putting that Dazzling Crescendo in is pretty solid anyway.
Best target, right? Yeah. Like there's an argument to do that anyway, because Dazzling Crescendo is like one of the best things you can Lexi into your arsenal.
Yeah, if your lightning count's high, definitely.
For sure. So round 7, I play another Lexi, and then I was ultimately able to get in the win with the Inspire Lightning. I actually won a lot of my games with Inspire Lightning. That doesn't speak to the card, it speaks to the power level of my deck. But yeah, we finish up Swiss, then I think I'm at 20th. I think I finished 20th on the day. So losing round 3, being a pretty low X1, but obviously that's plenty good for top 64.
Yep, I think you sit from memory, you're in the 3rd pod. So yeah, you're somewhere around that 20th mark. Yep. So the way it works, right? So day 1, actually a mammoth day, right? So day 1 is the sealed build, and then it's 7 rounds of sealed. You're sitting at about like 4 or 5 p.m. at this point. But then now you've got to draft and do 3 rounds of draft, because they've just cut to top 64 for this first draft. But then at the end of this day, after this first draft, they're going to cut to top 32, right?
Yeah, so it was brutal. So one of my main criticisms on the day was actually we had like this like very random break. After round 4, we had an hour-long food break, which was it was really annoying, because like an hour is a lot of time. And like round 4, like we literally just started playing. It kind of felt like, especially in limited. And then we just added that, and that was brutal on the day for sure. And they actually just sent out an email for Cincinnati as well. They said it's 8 rounds of Swiss, which is good. I'm happy for more rounds, don't get me wrong. But and then we still are drafting on the first day. So I really hope that we don't get that break, or that break happens after round 7. Something like that, because that definitely drew it out. But so we go into draft. The draft was it was pretty rough, to be honest. It was rough around the edges. So there's a lot of people drafting. There's 64 people. They're calling it out over the mic, but because there's 64 people, people are dropping cards left and right. Some people have to stop the draft, go to the bathroom. I mean, the draft I think ended up taking like an hour. So it took a really, really long time, which is fine. But ultimately, it made this event run kind of late. Talking about the cards I did drafted my favorite archetype to play during that draft. Absolutely busted deck. And basically, I was pretty confident on the, as soon as I finished the draft, that I had the deck, right? I had the deck that I wanted. It was the archetype, the one we had kind of, talked about and just dreamed of getting. So I was very happy, and I was very confident that I could at least 2-1 my pod, if not 3-0. So let's go into the first round. First round is my opponent. His name is Justin. Also met him at I think he was in the top 8 of the Calling 2019 over in Austin. And I played him a few times since then. And it was a bit of an odd match. He was playing Briar. I don't know if he was new, but he was missing a lot of his embodiment tokens. And my deck was just very, very strong. So kind of just got through that first match really easily. Matches 2 and 3 are definitely were not easy. So match 2, can't remember the guy's name, but he was said he was a listener of the podcast, so he'll probably be listening. Said he had come from Magic pretty recently, and he was a very good player. He was on Lexi, and he actually got me with this play. It was the most I've ever been bamboozled in Flesh and Blood. Like, he flips Heaven's Claws, pitches a yellow, plays Heaven's Claws, has 1 card in hand. So he has 2 cards in hand. I'm like, okay, like, we don't have to worry about too much here. So I go ahead and I play the turn Timber on it just for value. And then after that, he goes Ice Quake plus Lightning Surge Red on. Oh man, that was bad. Yeah, he totally got me with that one, and it put me in a pretty bad spot. But ultimately, I was able to close it out. So yeah, 2-0 on the. Yeah, totally got punished. It was hilarious. I was like, wow. As soon as he did, I was like, oh man, I did not see that coming. But so we go into round 3. Round 3, I play this guy. His name is Tarek. He's also from Magic, and he was on Briar. His deck seemed like it was decently strong, but ultimately, what I was most impressed with was actually the player. I could just tell by the way he was playing. He was pretty much making all of the decisions that I would have made. Definitely understood tempo and understood embodiment tokens much better than all of my opponents on the weekend. So despite the power level of my deck, it ended up being a decently close match, and I was quite impressed. It was funny because Dante was actually watching from behind on him, and he had said to me after the match, he was like, "Yeah, that guy made all of the decisions I would have made." So pretty impressive. And he was also quite new to the game, from what I understand. There was a couple of key moments. One, he cracker jacks to get something up to 4, and it already hit me with something, and I had runaways, and I actually blanked it with runaways and stopped the embodiment token. I think that was like the one mistake. And then there was another time when he was going to Arsenal, Lightning Surge was his hand. I actually double pitched for old him to stop the embodiment and put that card on top of his deck. And that was it was pretty devastating. It was definitely a turning point of the game. But yeah, really, really impressed with Tarek as a player. And he ultimately came 9th. So bad beats, but I think that he's going to be a force on the North American scene.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I
was going to say, definitely think we'll see more of Tarek, and I did see his match on camera as well. Yeah, very, very solid player. So I think we'll see more of an. So you end up 3-0 in the pod, right? Mm-hmm. So you're now,
which is where you want to be.
Yeah, 9-1 for the day, right? So you're actually 4th at the cut to top 32. So sitting pretty. Actually, let's just talk a little bit about your draft. So in that draft, do you know what you first picked in that draft?
It was a piece of armor. I don't recall exactly what it was, but it was definitely a piece of armor. But it was not deep blue.
Yeah. And so you drafted Old Time. You felt like you had a really solid deck. Obviously, I think you had dual element in that deck. You were able to utilize the Old Time ability sort of different ways. Yeah.
It was very heavy towards one side, but it was sort of dual element. I would say the turn that I was able to put the card on top of Tarek's deck and block the 2 damage was I had 3 ice cards in that deck.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So 9-1. It's getting late by this point, right? Like, this has been a big day, which I think is actually, just wanted to go to that. You said there's an email coming around about Cincinnati. Interestingly, I think it's like a real. So I think my understanding is what LSS and CFB are trying to do is make sure that as many players as possible have the opportunity to play the Pro Quest on day 2 as well. And so the way that some events work for other card games, I know specifically for Magic with how Channel Fireball have run their events in the past, is you do the Swiss portion of, say, sealed. So however many rounds that is, then you'd cut to however your top 64 for your first draft, right? You would do the draft, and sometimes you would play 1 round, and then you would end for the day. So it does give people obviously the understanding of the record of where they're going to come into for day 2, but then that's awkward with trying to do another set of drafts, so people are dropping. The other thing that has been done in the past is that you play, your X amount of rounds of sealed to get your top 8 cut, your top 64 cut. You cut and then you play 1 more round of sealed. I like that less personally, but I understand they're trying to obviously get as many players as possible the opportunity to know if they're in contention at the end of day 1, and if not, be able to play the Pro Quest rather than sort of waste their time and need to win out on the second day, lose their first round, miss the Pro Quest, and kind of not be the best day.
Sure. So I'm okay with the current format. I actually prefer it. I just hope that they could not do a random break after round 4 for an hour. That is ridiculous. And then please start earlier if possible. If you're going to run slow, like obviously this is the first limited one, so it's going to be hiccups. But and they get 11 or close to 11 p.m. is not nice, especially when some people have to drive like an hour past that, and you have to be back up at 6 a.m. again. And it's I do like playing a lot on day 1, getting like a clear cut group of people for day 2, so you can play the Pro Quest. But I'm all for starting earlier, but I know for some people that would just be kind of a death sentence. So I understand.
Gamer time, man. Gotta have gamer time.
Gotta have gamer time, right? But yeah, all in all, like it ended pretty late, but I was able to get 5 or 6 hours of sleep, which was nice enough.
Yeah. So 5 6 hours of sleep. How are you feeling? Obviously, if I'm sitting in fourth, you're sitting in a good position. There's one more draft. At this point, it's like you win your first round of draft, you're probably locked, very likely. But at the very least, 2-1, and you're in. So how are you feeling heading into the venue on Sunday?
Oh yeah, I mean 2-1 is a great place to be. You're able to drop one. So I actually wasn't locked. I was it was probably the way it would have ended up if I had gone 1-2. Sorry, if I had lost 2 and then 1-1. But in the earlier rounds, I actually would have gotten like 9th or 10th. So yeah, it was interesting. I was definitely getting close to the bubble, especially when I lost that second to last round. But overall, I felt good. Like I felt confident that I was going to top 8. I get into the draft pod. My draft pod is definitely very challenging, right? Like Tarek is back in my pod. I was passing to Tarek in the top 64 draft, and now he's passing to me in the top 32. And yeah, it goes extremely well. So I drafted the best deck on the day that I had on that day in that round. And I know it's funny because you'd be like, "Oh, you drafted the best deck, but you went 2-1." The reason I went 2-1 is because I was playing Alec Myers. I had lethal. I mean, I was dominating the game. I had lethal. And then I had Weave Ice Red in hand. I had Blue Frazzle. And then I had Blue Bolt and Shot and a resource card. And what I do is I play Weave Ice, pitch for Shiver, and then I drop the Bolt and Shot in instead of the Frazzle, and then just come in for Dominate 2. Like, obviously, just like the biggest punt of my life. Just totally lose the game. Other than that, the deck was incredible. It was funny because we laughed about it, but like, if you're gonna win the game, just I guess slow it down and make sure you double, triple, quadruple check or something like that. Because I have no clue how I made that play.
Yeah.
But that ultimately lost me that game. Other than that, like my matches were very clean on that portion.
It's like one of my biggest takeaways from playing Flesh and Blood and like the closing out games is like just keep the concentration for the last minute. That's all that's needed. Sometimes when it's long rounds, there's more rounds to play after this, and you start thinking about those mind wanders. It's like just got to play game to game, right, as much as possible. Yeah. And I did it actually, very similarly at a skirmish event not too long ago. It's sometimes difficult. So anyway, so you drafted Lexi this time around, right? So you had from sounds of it, an ice or a dual element, or what did that Lexi deck kind of look like?
That I'm probably not going to reveal just because I might redraft and I want to get cut or anything like that. But it was a Lexi deck and it was incredibly strong. Hate to be vague, but we got Cincinnati coming, and I felt like during this tournament that I was heavily outdrafting most of the other players in my pod. So if they all want to keep forcing Briar, then that's okay with me. And I'll probably leave the info until later.
Sure. So win the first round. At this point, you are basically locked. I think actually, if you look back at now, you'd be locked. So in round 2, you play Alec. That's a loss.
Yeah.
But then last round.
Yeah. Just got to win the last round. And I did. I played a guy named Caleb, I believe. I don't know if he's the first or last round. He was the first round. Caleb from Legends of Runeterra. But in the last round, I played one of the guys that top 8'd, and my deck was just so strong. It closed it out pretty easily, pretty handily. A big old dominate for some ridiculous amount. But yeah, then I know I'm locked for top 8 and the second seed.
Awesome. So getting into top 8, what was it kind of like? What was the feel like amongst like the players? Do they do an announcement? Like, how does that kind of look like getting into the top 8?
They do a little bit of an announcement, but like most people are playing the ProQuest or side events by the time. So it's not like there's a big crowd. I know when they get down to like 7, 8, 9, that's when it gets exciting because there was,
people on breakers.
People on breakers. But yeah, it was like whatever. We took a picture and I felt good. As soon as I made top 8, I thought I was going to win the event for sure. But obviously I didn't. Anyway, let's get into the draft, top 8 draft. The way it's sitting is like, so I'm passing to a Briar player that's passing to Nam on Oldhim, who's passing to a Briar player, who's passing to a Lexi player, and then there's 3 more Briars. So in the seat I'm in, I have 3 Briars passing to me. So I first pick up Ball Lightning because my pack one was terrible. By the way, they recorded my draft, so they might put it up. If they do, you'll see. It's pretty funny. But I first pick up Ball Lightning, and I see Lightning drop like immediately. So I already know there's like Briars probably near me. And then Earth goes extremely quick as well. So actually, I was in a very bad position to draft Oldhim and actually counter draft Nam. But by the way, when I say counter draft, like, I mean, everybody should have known that Nam was going to force Oldhim. I don't know if he said it, but I'd heard it a million times that he had played Oldhim in every single draft, played it in sealed, and that this is like what he does. So I was pretty surprised. But yeah, I was not in a good place to kind of cut him on Oldhim because I had like no Earth cards. And it's funny, if you look at Nam's deck, he actually has a lot of Earth cards despite there being 5 Briars, but he's passing to all of the Briars except for the one to his right. But yeah, both those elements go pretty quickly. Ice is decently open. And then on the wheel in pack 1, I'm just getting incredible Lexi cards. And so that's when I make my pick to go over to Lexi. You'll see it throughout this draft. I actually wheel some of the best cards in my deck. But I do have kind of like a dual element deck towards the end here, both Frost and Lightning. Overall, it's a powerful deck. I would call it like a 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10. Could maybe use a little bit more pumps. Overall, it was an extremely strong deck, and I walked away very, very confident. But one thing I was not confident about was when I was told that there was one Oldhim player at the table. Like once the draft was over, I knew who that Oldhim player was, and I was like, okay, well, we're in trouble. But at that point, I knew that I probably had the only deck that had any chance of beating Nam. 5 Briars with cracked baubles, some of them having cracked baubles in their deck do not have a chance of beating a 40 card Oldhim deck, and it's not a 40 card pile; it's a 40 card like real 40 card Oldhim deck.
It's the only Oldhim player.
Yeah, it was a strong deck in every way. So yeah, I probably had the only chance, and let's just go ahead and talk about it a little bit. So the way it would have worked is like, I probably play like around 34 cards in that match. He's playing 40. He will never see a second cycle, so I have to chip in, get him to kind of like 10 or below, ideally to round 6. Play a second cycle, something like a Ball Lightning plus the Overflexor plus the Weave, and just get a big dominate. And whether it's on a Frazzle or something like this, and get that extra damage and not run into. So what I would lose to in that case is if I ran into like the Summerwood Shelter that was drawn. So he's only playing off his first cycle. I'm setting up the second cycle. And if he tracks my push, maybe he's able to Arsenal a Summerwood and sit on it the entire game. Or maybe just pick something a little late, but that would have been the only chance. Is like if I don't run into like a bad beat on the last hand that's like a turn timber, fuse, like a red turn timber fuse, or the Summerwood Shelter on top of something else, then I have a chance. But ultimately, it definitely would have been like probably one of the hardest limited games of my life, like if I was going to win. Because Nam's deck didn't just fatigue, like it did a lot more than just fatigue. It was like 3 for 7 constantly. It had glacials. I mean, it had a lot. It had Oakenold.
Yeah, it just had good cards. It was just a good all-time deck with some other good cards in there as well. And, to the way Nam was playing, worked out really well, and being the only all-time draft. I mean, it's at the end of the day, whether Nam forced it, whether he drafted a seat, he ended up with the best deck at the table, right? And that's going to happen if you're the only free drafter, you're the only person drafting one hero. That's going to happen because you're going to have your choice of elements. You're going to have your choice of you're going to be able to wheel your class cards, which is really important. So yeah, congratulations to Nam on his performance and his run, and yeah, obviously set himself up for success in that draft. And it's actually funny, Brendan. I think doing my armchair analysis at home, watching the quarterfinals and waiting for yours to come on. I was talking to a mutual friend of ours about how maybe you could play into Nam's deck and how you'd be able to beat that. And one of the things that we talked about was exactly the same thing. First cycle versus second cycle with less cards. You're going to see a second cycle sooner. But there's a lot of turn timbers and Summerwood Shelters in Nam's deck. So, the ability to go wide could potentially really punish that. But the Briars, as you say, just weren't able to do that as they naturally might be able to because they just didn't have the card quality, being five Briar drafters at a table.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I feel like it's got to be like close to 0% chance that any of those Briars take down Nam's deck. Maybe, some crazy variants, but would have been hard to see. So let's get into the quarterfinals. The quarterfinals are paired up against the other Lexi. Of course, the game is going well. I'm winning the game. I end up arsenaling a red Electrify, and he's at 4. So I have lethal in like a million different ways. Then what he does is he has a 4-card hand. He Honing Hoods down a Polar Blast. He has no arrow in hand at this time. He Honing Hoods down the Polar Blast, pitches a card, doesn't pitch the ice card in his hand, of course. Then draws a card, draws the red Chilling Ice Vein, plays in, and then the Polar Blast I decide to not pay for. We'll talk about the analysis of why I didn't do that as well, because it's worse if I pay for it. The only thing, and by the way, going into his turn, the reason why I also Arsenal pass is the only thing I lose to is red Overflex, like literally nothing else. Obviously something else because there's Invigorate, but the main thing that's going to be a straight line of play is going to be a red Overflex in a 4-card hand. So yeah, he draws the red Chilling Ice Vein. He plays the Polar Blast. I decide not to pay. He plays Invigorate yellow. So for Invigorate to get the buff, you have to fuse. Then he plays the red Chilling Ice Vein and then fuses the Winter's Bite that's left in hand. It's 9. I'm at 6. It's perfect lethal. There's an
Dominate
earlier
that,
turn. Yeah, dominated. Because of the Polyblast. So there's an earlier turn in that game where he Heaven's Claws me and then attacks me again after that, and I don't Runaways. I considered it for a second, but ultimately, like, quickly didn't do it. And I knew that as soon as I did that, it was a mistake. I saw his deck was, there definitely was lightning cards in there, so I thought I might be able to do it again. But ultimately, I would have lived at 1 and then killed him with lethal on the final turn. So let's say I pay for the Polar Blast, right? Like, Brendan, why don't you pay for the Polar Blast? You have a blue. If I pay for the Polar Blast, he still comes in for the same amount. And then I block with my entire hand. I go down to 4, and he's even more likely to find the Overflex or find something else and tempo me out of the game. And I have guaranteed lethal in hand unless he has some ridiculous sequence, which is what happened. So I think ultimately I would have made the same choice. The Runaways was definitely a mistake, but there was, in that final situation, like, I think that the play was to not pay for the Polar Blast, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's really exact damage in the end. If it was a red Overflex or it was the red Invigorate, like, it's a bit of a different story, right?
Yellow Invigorate, actually.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If it's a red Invigorate, right, the Runaways doesn't matter, but yellow Invigorate ends up actually mattering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Well,
so that's how that ended. And then I lost.
Yeah, so really close match. You can go see this on FabTCG's YouTube. They've uploaded all the top 8, all of the day 2 Swiss drafts as well. So you can go and see both of Brendan's games on camera. Continuing the curse, you have to break it in Cincinnati. I actually sent an email and asked if they could put you on camera round 1.
I'm okay with that.
I'll just get out of the way. Let's break the curse.
I don't believe in it. Like, I don't think it's a thing.
Of course it's not.
It's funny in the ways that I have lost on camera because they are freaking hilarious. Triple invert, and then we have triple sigil, and then the quarters was the most by far, was like the craziest scenario in terms of, like, a sequence of cards that I didn't expect to be seeing on the other side of the table. But yeah, it's definitely a funny meme at this point.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Okay. we'll find out. Anyway, so again, I want to say congratulations to the whole top 8 of the event. Again, of course, congratulations to Nam. Played a really good event, took it out, and then of course to yourself, Brendan. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's funny. They actually, I just want to say real quick, they interviewed me right after.
Yeah.
Of course, like they always do. But I remember he's like, how do you feel? I was like devastated, right? Because I had already lost in the finals of a calling, so for me it was basically win or nothing. Not to sound not appreciative for getting top 8, like, that's awesome. Getting a P-tie is awesome. Getting gold foil is cool, but yeah, for me it was definitely I very much wanted to win the event. But all that means is that I've just gotta buckle up and go for the next one.
Exactly, run it back.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna move through to some Twitter questions now. So again, as I said, did put the call out this week to some Arsenal Pass listeners and our Twitter followers for some questions to ask Brendan about this calling experience, anything they might want to know, even not just about the calling, but just about the weekend, things like that. So we're going to get into it, Brendan. Some of these questions we've probably already answered as we've talked through the event and some of the things that happened, some of your choices. So, if that's the case, we'll just kind of acknowledge that and we'll move through these questions. But the first one comes from Adam Parker, who is actually out in Perth in Western Australia here and has listened to the podcast for quite a while now. He asked, in hindsight, would Brendan change anything about his plays and drafting in Dallas-Fort Worth? And without giving away secret tech, did the ProQuest change anything about your thinking on CC? So I'm going to go to the first part first.
Okay, I would not have changed any of my drafts. I think there was a question about plays. Like, I would have Runaways when I didn't do that. And obviously I would have not punted versus Alec in like that hilarious way. But other than that, I was very happy with my performance, especially my drafts. I was extremely happy with the way I drafted and the decks I came out with. Yeah. The ProQuest, the ProQuest reaffirmed literally everything I thought about the meta. It was pretty much key for key what we expected. Does it change anything? No, not really. I think that people brought a lot of decks they felt comfortable on, which is fine. But even though like the ProQuest meta is a good kind of thing to look towards as we go forward, and there's another ProQuest in Cincinnati, and then there's Nationals, we might see a little bit more decks just because diversity in decks because people will have more time to test. There was not a lot of time to test for Class Constructor here, and they can discover new decks or play different heroes. Or a lot of people will actually hide decks and not play them in the ProQuest sometimes. Especially when you have an event like Nationals looming. Yeah,
it was about what we thought. I think in terms of what decks would show up the meta. I mean, it makes sense, right? So it's a holdover from the previous meta where Prism obviously was very popular, had the ultimate result in winning the call in Vegas. So we saw Prism, we saw Bravo, which makes sense. We saw that prevalently through the Road to National season. And then we saw a few things like Dash and Katsu and Bolton sort of make up another big chunk of the decks that showed up. So yeah, I think it makes sense. We saw Lexi in top 8 though, which I think was cool.
Yeah, Lightning Lexi.
Yeah, which I think was probably
undefeated in Swiss as well. It was a really cool deck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I think you have to be undefeated in Swiss to make top 8 in the ProQuest anyway.
Nah, I think it was 2 or 3 X1s made it in.
Right.
There was a huge X1 bubble. I know because my friend Dante lost the 5th round, and there was a bunch of other people that lost the 5th round as well. Like, obviously same round, and Dante got like 10th or 11th.
10th, I think,
it was just all in the opponents. Because a lot of people will lose one round, or like they'll lose your second round, they'll drop. So if your opponent doesn't drop, then you're more likely to top 8.
Yeah. All right. Next question we have here is from Pelpster. Pelpster says, which limited format does Brendan prefer for Tales of Aria, sealed or draft, and why? Leading question there for Brendan.
So it's draft. I think that this is like one of the best draft formats ever made. It's really, really good. The sealed format, usually on Arsenal Pass, we're very positive. We have been literally since the beginning, but the sealed format for me is a solid 3 out of 10. Like, it's pretty bad. It's close to Arcane Rising, but you asked me, like, why is it bad? Briar, for the first time, this was not true in Monarch. Prism was not significantly better than the other heroes, but Briar can be. I would love to have a great Ultim deck. I would love to have a good Alexi deck, but the delta on Briar it seems to be quite a bit above and beyond the others. At least when you have like an average deck. Past that, the format is extremely tempo based. So when you get below your life threshold in Monarch was like 3, 4, something like that. The life threshold in Tales of Aria feels like it's like 13 or like 10 because your opponent will just chain 5-card hands into you, doing like 10 to 15 damage, just because it's ridiculous, and they get the embodiments. Sometimes you have there's quite a few sometimes like non-games, at least after like turn 2, turn 3, where you can just basically just be defending out, being presented lethal every single time. You rarely see the second cycle of your deck. So this sealed format is not my favorite. I think that's echoed by most competitive players. But the draft is very, very good. The draft is phenomenal. It's fantastic. And, with Tales of Aria draft being a significant portion of Nationals, I think we should all be excited.
Yeah, I think this is the best draft format. I do really like Monarch draft, but I think this draft format is better. It's such a cool format in the way that you can, I think, drafting your seat and there's so much edge to be gained, I think, in the draft itself, in the way that you position yourself, the way that you take your early picks, the way that you read signals. There's a lot of value in that. And it's funny because a lot of players new to the game or players that haven't played Limited, a lot of Limited does seem like more variance-based, more luck-based. And there's definitely some elements of that in Sealed. And I would agree that the Sealed format is, personally, I think it's better than Arcane Rising by quite a bit, but it's not as good as Welcome to Wraith or Monarch. But the draft format is so skill intensive and does reward players for both drafting very well and then playing very well.
Yeah, 100% agree.
All right, we got a question from the torso, Aaron Newson. Aaron Newson asks, what's Brendan's thoughts on weaponless heroes in Limited? And does he feel in Limited that Lexi and other such heroes are innately vulnerable to fatigue strategies? And so there's 3 questions here, so we'll break them down. Thoughts on how drafting these heroes changes when reliance on attacks and decks is increased with no damage-dealing weapon available. So
just read them out to me one by one.
Sure. So what's your thoughts on weaponless heroes in Limited?
So what's my thoughts on weaponless heroes? Well, I think in Arcane Rising, it didn't turn out very well, especially for Sealed. I think the draft format of Arcane Rising is okay, but because you could draft game plans. But other than that, if I look to like the premier weapons format, it's going to be Welcome to Wraith. It's a fantastic format. It's very healthy. It's one of my favorite Sealed formats, one of my favorite draft formats. I really like weapons in Limited. I also hate Fatigue, not because it's unbeatable, because usually it's very beatable, but if Fatigue wins like a major tournament of Flesh and Blood, and I'm not talking about Nom's deck. Nom's deck wasn't a Fatigue deck. Obviously, it could Fatigue, but when Fatigue starts winning, it makes Flesh and Blood look like a crappy game because who wants to play a game where where the way you're interacting with your opponent is them just tossing down to 4 cards and not thinking, right? So I don't like Fatigue for that sense, and I don't like formats that facilitate that actually being good, aka Arcane Rising Sealed. And I love weapon formats. So let's talk about Tails, which is like a hybrid format. Well, I mean, you have Dominate on a stick on Shiver, so there's ways to deal with it. It's not, it's very different from Arcane Rising in that sense.
Yep. And then Aaron asks, what do you feel in Limited to Lexi and other such heroes are they more innately vulnerable to fatigue strategies because they don't have a weapon?
I think in sealed, Lexi's actually quite vulnerable to fatigue sometimes, depending on what you open. It's actually why I sometimes like if I have like a medium Lexi deck, I will sometimes avoid it in sealed just because I don't want to get fatigued. If I have a great Lexi deck, I mean, there's no way I'm getting fatigued. But in drafts, like I think you almost never get fatigued as Lexi. Actually, you're playing the hero that is least vulnerable to fatigue, which is funny. It seems kind of ironic, but I think that Lexi is the hero that is least likely to get fatigued in a draft scenario.
Yeah, I think you have the ability with the flexibility of Shiver to adapt to what your opponent's doing, whether that be like all the time trying to defend out tall. You can go wide on certain things, or you have this ability with Shiver. Shiver is such a strong weapon. So particularly in draft where you can build around your set of elements that you want to, that works really well. And then lastly, Aaron says, thoughts on how does the drafting of these heroes change because they don't have a weapon that deals damage?
Yeah, I think so. Like in Lexi, it's pretty well known with most of the community. I feel like in draft Lexi, either going wide or going tall. Both strategies are pretty good against fatigue. Obviously, going tall with dominate can sometimes be quite a bit better, but yeah, the strategy definitely does change. But I think it's inherent to being successful with the hero anyway.
Yep, cool. Next question comes from Sammy. Sammy says, at what point does a pivot come into play? So Sammy's talking about a pivot in a draft. Does it depend on how the draft is going? But is there a point of no return where you won't be able to pivot after a certain pick in a draft?
Sure. There is a statistical point. You can only have 15 cards you can't play. That also counts armor that you'll be using, so keep that in mind. This is a good time to talk about like Tales of Aria draft. I actually think this is one of the most fragile draft formats because we don't have generics. Everything is committal in one way. So obviously element cards can be used to two heroes, but because they are, isolating one hero out of your choice there, it's really hard to switch off. Like if you draft all ice and you're like, okay, now I'm going to go Briar. It's pretty tough. So I actually think that this is the format where I try to stay the most diverse early. Like when I say early, I mean like 3 to 4 picks, and then I try to hunker down into at least an element pretty quickly. Because the last thing you want is to be like 3-4 picks ice, and then boom, now you're having to fully pivot into Briar or something like that. And then the cards that you get like pick 13, 14 are Guardian cards, and it seems like it's really fragile and really sensitive to potentially not having enough playables, whether if you draft something too aggressively or if you are actually too conservative. So very fine line in this format.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually thought initially this format was going to be probably just as easy to pivot in because there's only 3 heroes and you have the elements and they go into 2 heroes, right? But in Welcome to Wraith or into Monarch's probably a better example, you have the ability to pivot so much easier because you can actually, in the early picks, say you can probably leave yourself pretty open up until the end of pack 1 because you can take a few generics, you can take a few shadow cards, say, and you could end up with some Livia cards and then some chain cards and still be able to pivot between the two, even till the end of like pack 1 into pack 2. And Welcome to Wraith with just generics, you could do that pretty late as well into sort of like picks 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. With this format, you are so heavily rewarded for reading what happens though. So you can hedge some picks. You don't want to commit too hard, but if the card quality is really good, then you can definitely do that. But some of those element cards are going to allow you to still be able to pivot probably up until like picks like 6, 7, 8. And then by that time, you're actually going to start to get the wheel from the table, and then you're going to get more signals anyway. So I think that's the pivot is definitely different in this format of Tales of Aria, but it's actually, I think it's what makes the format so exciting. It makes it so skill testing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We've got the next question from French, I think is how it's said. What was your starting plan going into your drafts? What were your first picks in top 8 draft, and ultimately what made you choose Lexi in that draft? So kind of that pivot point, right? We're probably talking about.
Sure. So we talked about it. I picked a Ball Lightning first because the pack was really weak. Had an amulet in it as well, I believe. And did I hope to play Lexi? No. What I did hope to do, and that's what I had done in every draft in the event prior to this, was play my seat and play open. And I was so heavily rewarded for that every single time I drafted. It didn't really come in with any notion of what hero I wanted to play, what hero I didn't want to play. I just knew that I could play every hero, and there were certain archetypes and certain deck strategies that I would go for if I was playing that hero. And I think that's really the way you have to draft Tales of Aria. It's not that you can't get rewarded for just starting out Briar, starting out Oldhim, or starting out Lexi. It's just that if you do find yourself in a scenario where there's other, significant amount of other players in that hero at the table, you just like auto lose. It's bad.
Yeah, I don't know what people ended up doing in terms of whether they were committed to forcing or whether they're committed to staying open. But let's take I guess a tale of two players, right? Let's take one of these Briar players, and let's say they were playing to force. Well, they end up in a class with five other players, and then if you're not open to, I guess, your draft, you're probably just from pick one, just picking the best cards for a Briar deck, right? You're not picking the best cards to draft your seat, you're not picking the best cards in the pack, you're just picking the best cards for a Briar deck. So that's going to potentially cause you some issues around being able to pivot or be able to change or whatever it might be. And then on the flip side of that, let's say, I don't know whether Nam planned to force it or whether Nam stayed open and obviously just drafted that hero and got heavily rewarded. But let's say Nam does force. If that does change and ends up being 3 or 4 old-time drafters, it's probably a very different deck from Nam, right? So, you can see there was 2 Lexi players, 1 old-time player, and 5 Briar players, and you saw the payoff for both yourself and obviously Nick made it to the finals against the old-time, and then the Briars, the 5 Briars, fought for that card quality and ended up with the worst decks at the table. Like, it's not even close, right? So you can kind of see how that plays out in terms of that drafting your seat and picking the cards that are best.
Heard this tale before. Just go back to the other limited calling.
Yes,
Matt Rogers, Kiki on the Shadow Heroes and on 2 different Shadow Heroes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was like, their decks were just so much better than the rest of the people at the table. Monarch, I'm not, and if you were a part of that draft pod, and trust me, I know what happened. Like, I know Monarch, the packs are crazy. It's way harder in Monarch to, read the right one. And that can definitely happen because sometimes the packs just have all light or no shadow, and it's definitely a funky draft format because of that.
Yeah, and it only takes 1 or 2 players who maybe don't draft their seats in the way they should, which then can kind of skew with signals, where especially if the packs are a bit skewy, which we had in Monarch. But if there's this temptation, I think, and rightly so. You come through the day, maybe in the day 2 drafts, both your drafts were Briar, and they worked out really well for you, and then you need to commit. There's a point in the top 8 where maybe it's 3rd or 4th pick and you just decide to commit. You go with what you go with what's brought you this far, and all of a sudden you end up in maybe the class or the deck and the seat that you shouldn't. And it's perfect, completely understandable. I think it's similar probably to what happened in Auckland, although I know from one of the top 8 drafters, Sam, who has actually listened to the pod and did let us know that the packs were pretty interesting, and I did get to see a bit of that top 8 coverage. They did look a bit interesting, but yeah, it's hard when you're under the lights when all these things are happening and there's time limits, right, Brennan? Like, you've got some time limits in terms of making these picks.
There is. It is narrated, and you can't look at your picks, and it's timed and what you would expect, right?
Yeah. So going back to what is very, very. It makes a lot of sense. Next question we got here, Brennan, comes from Greg. Actually, sorry, this is a question we just answered from Greg about the pack and the pick and the Lexi. Mitch says, what are Brennan's thoughts on a player who'd only been playing for a couple of weeks, who, from Mitch's understanding, made the final round? So, actually, when we recorded this, we weren't sure who Mitch was talking about. Could be Caleb, the Legends of Runeterra player who had a win-in against you in the last round, I think. Could have been Tarek, who ended up 9th. Could have been Nick. I'm not sure how long Nick's been playing. But there was a lot of players who are, newer to this game who did put up some pretty good performances, right, Brennan?
Yeah, so Tarek and Caleb impressed me, and I'm actually going to go look at my thing right now because I want to get that the other guy's name because he was actually very new.
I will talk while you do that, but yeah. I think my takeaway.
So it was sorry, I'm just figuring out how to. It's Yang Ji Yang. He was quite new. I think he started playing in pre-release, and he was very, very good.
Okay, interesting. That was on day 2, right? Or day 1? Day 2.
Yeah, that was day 2, I believe. Yeah, no, day 1 first draft.
Yeah. So I think kind of the thing you could say is that all these players, from my understanding, Caleb from Legends of Runeterra, Tarek from Magic, have backgrounds where they've played. I'm pretty sure in Runeterra there's limited as well, as there is in Magic. So players have played limited, and while the games are different, there is these Brennan's favorite words, some heuristics that they could definitely take across, and just some ingrained understanding of how TCGs work with limited, with trading, with value, that they can definitely port across to this game. And I think that limited is the perfect entry point for these players to come and have a really good weekend, because they can bring some of these skills across. And you know what? In terms of players coming into Flesh and Blood, everyone's kind of on an even footing. Not many people had drafted Tales of Aria extensively, right? Because they didn't have the opportunity to. So these players weren't actually that uneven a footing. They just had spent less time with the game, but they have these other skills they could bring across. So I don't think it's a surprise to see these players do really well in Limited. I'd be interested to see how they do in Constructed. I'm sure they're all very good players, so I assume they'll do well in Constructed as well with a bit of time under their belt.
Yeah, 100%. But those are my three. Like, those were the ones that really impressed me.
Yeah. Next question comes from Luke. How did the final... We've kind of already answered this one, but if you want to kind of just summarize it, I guess, Brendan, how did the final draft end up being 5 Briars? Was it stubbornness or the packs stacked with good Briar cards?
The packs were definitely not stacked with good Briar cards. Next.
Okay. Yeah, I think we talked about it. Like, there's a bit of a comfort blanket with something like Briar, maybe, with what's happened over the weekend. Maybe they played in sealed, maybe they played in multiple drafts. Maybe it was, it was right for their seat initially, and then circumstances changed with cards being cut and things like that, and maybe there was, too many picks.
For sure, I could speak more on it. Like, listen, it happens, but like it shouldn't have happened. Like, this is not like Monarch where you can get the 0 shadow cards and these weird twisted. Like, the packs are relatively predictable, especially in dispersion. So like, it should not have happened, but it's top 8. It's high. It's high. What would you call it? High pressure. Like, there's so much going on, but like, I don't want to sound like mean or anything like that, because I'm not trying to say that, but it definitely wasn't because like they were just getting incredible Briar cards or something like that. Because I mean, that just doesn't really happen in this format, right? Because you're usually picking element cards and armor first anyway.
Yeah, it's not taking anything away from the players. I mean, these players made top 8. They got there on their merits and their players over the weekend. So, to say that it's anything other than, I guess what happened in the draft happened in the draft, right? But you saw that again in Auckland with very good players in the top 8 draft. I've seen that in other drafts of events with very good players in it. Like, it's not uncommon, and it does happen with a few decisions. And actually, trickle-down decisions happen as well, where one player makes a decision to change, and it could be too late for a player to pivot, and they get completely cut, for instance. It happens.
There's a guy here, Alec Myers, who I'm decently close with. He lives in Wichita. Played him a few Road to Nats. But I mean, he had said on the Fab TCG Instagram page, like they interviewed him in Seal, he said he was going to force Briar in every draft. So like, that's what he did. He forced Briar in that draft, and that was what was expected. With the other people, I'm not sure. I know Drayton was sitting to my left, so obviously I had 3 Briars feeding into me. I was the Lexi player, so I may have fed him some good Briar cards, like the boots or something that made him think that it was okay. But yeah, I mean, in this format, it's not going to be like a dispersion thing that's going to really drive you there. It's probably some early picks. You get a little bit too committed to them, or you pivot too late. Who knows?
Yep. All right, let's wrap up the last 3 questions. We got a question from Zane here. There was a poll about what hero people expected to win the Pro Quest, and the top 2 answers were Bravo and Prism. Ultimately, the final of the Pro Quest was Bravo and Prism. Given that Brennan is a self-proclaimed meta slave, does he plan to bring one of these heroes to Nationals?
Well, I'm not a meta slave. I mean, I think when we said meta slave, it was the wrong word to use. I just play what I think is the best deck, and I'm not really partial to any hero. There's some strategies that I don't like very much. Like I don't know, it's really not a thing anymore. But back in like Welcome to Wraith, I played like the fatigue deck in the first constructed calling, and like it's not fun getting close to time, having to rush your opponent all the time. Like it's not very fun. I don't really like those strategies. But yeah, just because Bravo and Prism in the finals has no influence. Well, it has a massive influence on the deck I'll pick, but doesn't mean I'll pick those decks,
Yeah, I guess to clarify, like the meta slave comments and like it's more something I think we've joked about. Really, what we're saying and what we aim to do is have the best deck at any given event, right? And so that comes through testing and playing, and sometimes that's the most known quantity, right? Chain, we started week 1 on that deck. We couldn't find anything that could beat that deck or the iterations of the deck that we came up with. So that was the deck that we played for the season. Next time it could be a completely unknown quantity. It could be a hero that we haven't played with before. So it just depends. But I think knowing those results now, there's definitely an impact, right? Like there's a huge impact on what that means for heading into Nationals, for instance, for yourself, Brendan, right? With what we're looking at for constructed.
Yeah, being able to predict the meta is a huge part of winning events, I think.
Yeah. It doesn't mean in terms of playing one of those 2 decks, but I get what Zane's getting here.
Who knows, though? I might be auraing up. I might be triple tome of divining. You never know. Just sit across from me. I'm gonna lock you out. You got my parable of humility. All these other.
To be fair, you did hard claim on I think about episode 4 or 5 that you were going to be a Prism main. So I mean.
Yeah, that was definitely.
Still
I did
waiting.
say that I might. I did say I might play it at nationals too. So I think I've just been sandbagging it the whole time. I'm like secretly, you know what I do in my fun time? I play Saber Bolton. Especially, you know, what I do is I bring it to armories. I figure out who the new players are, and I slap Saber Bolton on the table and just go enjoy the game.
All right. Well, next question we have is from Yazi. Yazi asks, "What does Brendan get on his pizza? Is he a pineapple guy, a pepperoni guy? What about chili flakes or jalapenos?"
So I have celiac disease, so which means I can't eat gluten. So I'm not really a pizza guy. They do have gluten-free pizza, but it's not as good and it's hard to get. So best way to answer that is back when I did used to eat pizza because I didn't know, didn't know my whole life about celiac. Definitely not pineapple on pizza. Definitely not.
I mean, that's horrendous. I mean, I wouldn't not eat a piece of pizza because it had pineapple on it if it was a really good pizza, but I'm gonna actively avoid that. But you know what? If you have gluten-free pizza, I just think it's pizza without the fun, right? You just might as well eat something else.
Yeah, why don't you just rub it in?
There's so many other nice things you can eat, though. It's fine. Question from Blev. The Blevins says, "How much is the meme true that sealed is just hope you open a good briar pool?" Great question to end on here. It's our last question from the Twitter questions, Brendan.
Yeah, I wish it was 0% true, but it's not 0% true. Opening a good briar pool is a good thing to do in these events. Does it mean you win the event? Absolutely not. So Tales of Aria, like I said, so tempo based and so explosive. If you make a mechanical mistake in Tales of Aria Sealed, you usually lose the game on the spot, and you should. So if you are a bad player with a good pool, I think you have very little chance of doing well in the sealed format. There's been other sealed formats where that hasn't been the case, but this one in particular, it's not about like you can't play the cards correct, but as soon as you do make a mistake or you missequence something, like you're just going to usually lose off the back of it. In terms of Briar, I do think that Briar is more powerful than the other heroes, like on average in sealed, but I would love to have like a broken Oldhim deck or a broken Lexi deck in sealed to be fantastic. But yeah, I'm gonna be honest. Like sometimes when I open my packs, I'm definitely looking at my Briar pool initially because usually that's where you end up.
Yeah, it's solid, right? Like if you open up a good Lexi or like a really good Lexi or a really good Oldhim pool, like fantastic. Play those heroes. Like those are, you're still going to win games with those. And like Brendan said, unlike other formats where you could just open certain pools, and I guess the games got through the second cycle and the tempo was less important, and just the ability to have good hands was actually more important. I guess opening these pools, you could just run with them, right? You could just sort of run through the fields with them. But it's actually harder, interestingly, with this format with Tales of Aria, even though sometimes it feels like there's a bit of a meme in terms of what you open. But it's their play skill is still important.
Yeah, I think play skill in this format. So like it's weird because it's both like negatively affected in the sense that sometimes you just get rolled by somebody, but it's also positively affected because the format is so punishing to mistakes that you beat a lot of people off of them doing something that's not the best play.
Yep. Or they swing tempo at the wrong time, or they can't pivot when they need to, things, etc., etc. So anyway, that's our Twitter questions. Thanks to everyone who did submit a Twitter question, added us, and just to, I guess, compliment what we talked about with the Dallas calling, the event itself. I hope that gave everyone an insight. Second time lucky on the recording. Yeah, as I said at the start of the pod, we did already record this episode yesterday. So if you are a patron who gets the episode early, unfortunately it won't be early this week. Apologies for that. We did have to re-record, but I think it's it's not quite as good as our best episode, Brendan, which was the original, which people unfortunately won't get to hear. But we've done our best.
I love how you're just going to tease people with that. This one was definitely better. But anyway, speaking of Patreon, it's nice that you mentioned that. We actually have Patreon, the Arsenal Pass Patreon, where we're, you ever seen us walking around those events with those really cool mats? Well, we're actually selling them on Patreon, exclusive to patrons. Limited print run of 80 for now. We'll get more later, trust me. And 2 maximum order per person because they are selling it like hotcakes. I really apologize if by the time you hear this message, they are sold out. It is quite likely, but check it out if it's something you're interested in. Our Patreon has tons of extra content. Most notably, if we have a deck tech up on the YouTube channel, if you go over to the Patreon, we got long, detailed deck guides, theory, ratios, spreadsheets, everything you need. Pick it up, be competitive, take it to nationals, be the national champion, and give me a little credit. No, I'm kidding. As well as exclusive pods and the once a month live Q&A podcast session, whatever the topic is chosen by the patrons. with that, I want to shout out the YouTube channel. Tons of stuff going up on YouTube. Like I said, Sasha Markovic, Time of the Round is coming up soon, as well as gameplay videos. It's Reinhardt versus Chain, I believe. And then next week, of course, we got more gameplay, more content. Arsenal Pass YouTube is the place to be. On Twitter, I'm located at Brendan APG. Hayden is located at Fyendale, FYN_DALE.
FYEN.
Fine. FYEN. Well, make it easier, brother. Anyway, that's all for now. I will see you in the next one where hopefully I get introduced as calling champion Brendan Patrick and not multiple time calling loser. But we hope you enjoyed the episode and see you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.